The crisp autumn air carried a gentle breeze across the bustling streets of Concord, New Hampshire. Golden leaves twirled through the sky like tiny dancers before settling on the pavement outside the high school auditorium. Inside, students, teachers, and parents gathered eagerly, their voices blending into an excited hum. The White House press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, was about to deliver a speech. For many in the audience, she was an inspiration. A young, determined woman who had climbed the ranks of American politics and was now the face of communication for President Donald Trump. But for one teenage boy, she was more than just a political figure. She was a beacon of grace, confidence, and intelligence. A woman whose presence alone seemed to command respect. 17-year-old Brian Calloway sat anxiously in the front row, his fingers gripping the edges of his chair. He wasn't usually one to admire politicians, but Karoline Leavitt was different. She was young, eloquent, and had a way of speaking that made even the most complex issues seem understandable. Brian had followed her career closely, watching her press briefings, reading her statements, and marveling at how she handled the pressure of the White House with composure. Tonight, she was here in his hometown to speak about leadership, resilience, and the importance of youth involvement in politics. But Brian couldn't focus on any of that right now. His heart pounded in his chest because he had made a decision, one that felt both thrilling and terrifying. He was going to meet her after the speech, and he was going to tell her something he had been holding inside ever since he first saw her on television. "You are so beautiful." As the lights dimmed, the crowd quieted down. The event's host stepped onto the stage and introduced Karoline Leavitt. A moment later, she walked out from behind the curtain, dressed in an elegant navy blue dress, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders. The room erupted into applause. Brian's breath caught in his throat. She looked even more radiant in person. Karoline began her speech, her voice strong and clear. She spoke about her journey, the challenges she had faced as a young conservative woman in politics, and the importance of standing firm in one's beliefs. She encouraged the young people in the room to dream big and to never let anyone tell them they weren't capable. Brian listened intently, absorbing every word. But as she neared the end of her speech, his nerves returned. Was he really going to say it? Would she think he was foolish? Would the Secret Service tackle him if he got too close? The speech concluded with thunderous applause. Karoline stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by reporters, local politicians, and school faculty. Brian watched from a distance, unsure if he had the courage to approach her. Then, as if fate had intervened, she turned in his direction. Their eyes met. She smiled warmly. And in that moment, he knew he had to do it. Summoning every ounce of courage, Brian pushed through the crowd until he stood directly in front of her. His heart pounded against his ribs as he took a deep breath. "You are so beautiful," he blurted out. The words hung in the air, heavier than he had expected. A few people nearby chuckled while others looked on curiously. Brian's face turned crimson. He wanted to run, to disappear into the sea of people before she could respond. But then something unexpected happened. Karoline's expression softened. The laughter around them faded as she looked at Brian with genuine warmth in her eyes. For a moment, there was silence, an unspoken connection between the teenage boy and the White House press secretary. Then she spoke. What she said next would change Brian's life forever. Brian's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he waited for Karoline's reaction. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. He had blurted out the words that had been trapped in his mind for months, but now, with the whole room watching, he wasn't sure if he had done the right thing. Karoline's lips parted slightly in surprise. Then, to Brian's astonishment, she smiled, a warm, genuine smile, not the rehearsed kind politicians often wear in public. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. "That means a lot." Brian let out a shaky breath. He had expected her to laugh it off or give him a polite nod and move on. Instead, she took a step closer, her piercing blue eyes studying him with a mixture of amusement and something else, understanding. "What's your name?" she asked. "Be Brian," he stammered. "Well, Brian," she continued, her tone kind but firm, "I appreciate your compliment, but I hope you also see that beauty isn't just about how someone looks. It's about what they stand for, what they fight for, and how they carry themselves in this world." Brian felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected a lecture, but he also hadn't expected her words to hit so deeply. He nodded, unable to find the right response. Karoline glanced around at the crowd, which had quieted to watch their exchange. Then she turned back to Brian. You know, when I was your age, I never imagined I'd be standing here in front of so many people, let alone working in the White House. A lot of people told me I was too young, too inexperienced, or that I didn't belong in politics. She paused, and Brian felt the weight of her words settle over him. But I refused to let that stop me, she continued. I had to learn to see my own value, even when others didn't. That's real beauty, Brian, the confidence to stand tall in the face of criticism, to keep pushing forward even when people doubt you. Brian swallowed hard. He hadn't thought about beauty that way before. He had only seen Karoline as this untouchable, graceful figure on TV. But now, standing in front of her, hearing her speak with such conviction, he realized she was more than that. She was strong. She was determined. And that, more than anything else, made her beautiful. Karoline placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You have something in you, Brian. I can see it. But promise me something. Brian nodded quickly, eager to hold on to this moment. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small, that you'll believe in yourself, even when it's hard. Can you do that? His eyes burned with emotion. He could feel tears threatening to escape, but he blinked them away. Yes, he whispered. Karoline smiled again. Good, because the world needs young men like you who aren't afraid to speak their minds, who see value in kindness and sincerity. Brian couldn't hold back any longer. A single tear slipped down his cheek, and he quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. But Karoline didn't laugh or mock him. Instead, she gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before turning back to the crowd. Thank you for coming tonight, everyone, she said, bringing the attention away from Brian, giving him the space to gather himself. I look forward to meeting more of you. As she moved away, shaking hands and taking photos with attendees, Brian remained rooted in place, her words echoing in his mind. He had come to tell her she was beautiful. Instead, she had shown him what true beauty really was. And in that moment, something inside him changed. For the first time in his life, he believed he could be more. Brian stepped out of the auditorium into the cool night air, his mind racing. The weight of Karoline's words still lingered in his chest, heavy but not burdensome, more like a fire that had just been lit. He had expected to be embarrassed, maybe even regretful, but instead, he felt something else, inspired. He walked slowly toward the parking lot, his breath visible in the crisp autumn air. His best friend, Jason, caught up with him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Dude, Jason said, laughing. I can't believe you actually said that to her. Brian smirked, shaking his head. Yeah, well, neither can I. But man, did you see how she responded? Jason continued. She didn't make fun of you. She actually talked to you like you mattered. Brian nodded, his fingers running through his dark brown hair. That was the part that stuck with him the most. Karoline Leavitt, one of the most prominent figures in American politics, had taken the time to speak to him, really speak to him. And she had seen something in him that he wasn't sure he even saw in himself. He replayed her words in his head. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small. For most of his life, Brian had felt exactly that. Small. He wasn't the smartest kid in school. He wasn't the best athlete. He wasn't the most popular. He had big dreams but no real belief that he could actually achieve them. But Karoline's words had shifted something inside him. Maybe he wasn't as small as he thought. The next morning, Brian sat in his bedroom, staring at his laptop screen. He had planned to play video games all weekend, but instead, he found himself researching. He read articles about Karoline Leavitt's journey, how she had worked tirelessly as a young conservative voice, how she had faced relentless criticism but had never backed down. She had started small. She had faced doubts. And yet, here she was. Brian leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. What am I doing with my life? Something had to change. At school that week, Brian found himself thinking differently. He sat up straighter in class. He paid more attention. In history class, when his teacher asked for opinions on current political issues, Brian, normally the quiet one, raised his hand. I think young people don't realize how much power they actually have, he said confidently. Most of us think politics is something for older people, but look at someone like Karoline Leavitt. She started working in government at our age. We act like we can't change anything, but maybe we can. His teacher raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting point, Brian. Do you see yourself getting involved in politics someday? Brian hesitated. A week ago, he would have laughed off the idea. But now? I don't know, he admitted. But I think I want to start paying attention. After class, a few students approached him. That was pretty cool, man, one of them said. I never thought about it like that. Yeah, another student added. You should join the debate club or something. Brian chuckled. Debate club? That was for people who actually knew what they were talking about. But why not? That night, he sat down at his desk, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. Then, without thinking too much about it, he typed out an email to the head of the debate club. Hi, my name is Brian Calloway. I'd like to attend your next meeting. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. For the first time in his life, he was taking a step toward something bigger. And it had all started with one moment. One conversation with a woman who had seen something in him he hadn't yet seen in himself. The following week, Brian found himself sitting in the back of the school's debate club meeting, arms crossed, his nerves threatening to consume him. He had never done anything like this before. It felt like he had stepped into a world where he didn't belong, surrounded by students who spoke with confidence and authority. All right, everyone. The club president, a senior named Rachel, said as she stood in front of the group. Tonight, we're discussing free speech on social media. Should platforms have the right to censor certain views? Or does that violate the First Amendment? Hands shot up. One student immediately argued that social media companies were private businesses and could set their own rules. Another countered that these platforms were essentially the modern public square and should allow all voices, even controversial ones. Brian listened, fascinated. He had opinions on this topic. He had watched press briefings where Karoline Leavitt defended free speech, had read articles where politicians debated the issue. But could he actually speak up? Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he raised his hand. Rachel nodded toward him. Go ahead, Brian. Brian swallowed hard. I think there's a bigger issue here, he said. A lot of young people don't even know what their rights are when it comes to free speech. We argue about whether social media platforms should censor people, but how many students in the school can actually explain the First Amendment? A few students murmured in agreement. Brian took a deep breath and continued. I used to think politics wasn't for me, he admitted. That it was something for older people in Washington, not for teenagers in a high school classroom. But the truth is, we're the next generation of leaders. If we don't start paying attention now, we'll wake up one day and realize we don't even know what we're fighting for. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then, Rachel smiled. That's a great point, Brian. I think we should do a segment next week on understanding constitutional rights. Would you like to help lead that discussion? Brian's heart nearly stopped. Lead a discussion? Him? He hesitated, but then he thought of Karoline's words. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small. He straightened his shoulders. Yeah, I'd like that. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just watching from the sidelines. He was stepping into the conversation. That night, still riding the high of the debate club meeting, Brian sat on his bed and did something bold. He pulled out his phone, opened Instagram, and typed out a message. To Karoline Leavitt. Subject, thank you. Hi, Ms. Leavitt. You probably don't remember me, but I met you at a speech in Concord last week. I was the kid who told you that you were beautiful. At the time, I thought beauty was just about how someone looked. But you showed me that real beauty is about strength, confidence, and standing for something bigger than yourself. I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I joined my school's debate club. I'm speaking up for what I believe in. I don't know if I'll ever go into politics, but for the first time, I feel like my voice matters. I'll never forget what you told me. Sincerely, Brian Calloway. He hesitated for a moment, then hit send. It was a long shot. She probably got thousands of messages a day. But still, he felt lighter knowing that he had sent it. Then, just as he was about to put his phone away, his screen lit up. New message, Karoline Leavitt. Brian's breath caught in his throat as he opened it. Brian, I remember you. And I'm incredibly proud of you. Keep going. Keep using your voice. The world needs young men like you. Karoline. Brian stared at the screen, his vision blurring with emotion. A week ago, he had been just another high school kid, unsure of himself, afraid to step into the spotlight. Now, because of one conversation, one moment of courage, he was on a path he had never expected. And he wasn't looking back. The next few months changed everything for Brian. His involvement in the debate club deepened, and with each discussion, he grew more confident. He found himself speaking with authority, researching policies, and even engaging in friendly debates with his teachers. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about finding his voice. One evening, after finishing a research paper on the history of political movements in America, Brian's mother knocked on his bedroom door. "You've been working harder than ever lately," she said, leaning against the doorway. "I don't think I've ever seen you this focused." Brian smiled, stretching his arms. "I guess I just finally feel like I have something to say." His mom stepped inside and handed him an envelope. "Well, maybe you'll want to say even more after reading this." Brian furrowed his brow as he took it. The return address caught his attention immediately. The White House. His pulse quickened. No way. He tore open the envelope with shaky hands and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Brian, I wanted to personally thank you for your message. Your story reminded me why I do what I do. It's young people like you, driven, courageous, and willing to speak up, who give me hope for America's future. I'm writing to invite you to Washington, D.C. as a guest at the White House for an upcoming event on youth leadership. We need voices like yours at the table. I look forward to seeing you there. Sincerely, Karoline Leavitt." Brian's hands trembled as he lowered the letter. His mom watched him with a knowing smile. "I think she sees something in you, Brian," she said softly. "Just like you're starting to see it in yourself." A few weeks later, Brian found himself standing in the heart of Washington, D.C., gazing up at the grandeur of the White House. The city buzzed with energy, but nothing compared to the nervous excitement coursing through his veins. Dressed in his best suit, he stepped through the grand halls, feeling like he had entered another world. The event, held in the East Room, was a gathering of young leaders from across the country, students, activists, and aspiring politicians. And then there she was. Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium, addressing the room with the same poise and passion that had inspired Brian months ago. But this time, she wasn't just a distant figure on a stage. She was someone who had changed his life. After the speech, Karoline mingled with the attendees. Brian's heart pounded as he approached her. She noticed him immediately and smiled. "Brian," she said warmly, "I was hoping you'd come." He swallowed hard, nodding. I still can't believe I'm here." "You should believe it," she said, her expression serious. "You earned it." Brian took a deep breath. "I just wanted to say thank you. When I told you that you were beautiful that night, I didn't understand what real beauty was. But now I do. It's strength. It's courage. And you showed me that." Karoline's eyes softened. "And now you're showing it to others." She extended her hand, and as Brian shook it, he felt something shift inside him, something permanent. He wasn't just the kid who had admired someone from afar anymore. He was stepping into his own future. And he was ready for it.